Welcome, Paul. How are you?
I'm good, my friend Julius. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for coming on and having a chat.
Easy.
So I might just explain who you are in case anyone doesn't know you. So I got a bio here. So you're a senior instructor of Heaven Man Earth International Internal Arts and Tai Chi School, as well as principal instructor of Heaven Man Earth Tokyo Branch School. You're a direct student of the founder of Heaven Man Earth, Sifu Adam Meisner, and you've been training directly with him for about 18 years. Is that right? Ish?
Yeah, ish. Might be.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool, cool. So you have fairly extensive experience in Qigong, Neigong, meditation, as well as multiple martial arts, including what you've called natural fist boxing, Kung Fu, Muay Thai, Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, Tai Chi, of course. And you've been doing that for some decades. Is that right? Well, you've done, you're mostly Tai Chi now, but this is, how long has that gone on for?
Well, I mean, I guess the martial arts journey started when I was very young. I,
Right.
um, I don't really know how old I was. I just remember that my mother would drop me at the tram and I would take a tram in perfect weather with an umbrella because back in those days, the tram had you had to pull the cord on the tram, and I wasn't tall enough to reach the cord. That's what I remember. So I had to
Yeah,
carry an
right.
umbrella so I could reach the cord and get off and go to my taekwondo classes.
Right.
But that's a long
Now,
time ago. But I mean, decades. I guess it must be close to decades of. Well, if it's 18 years under Sifu Adam and HME, then I guess it's close to decades plural of what
yeah,
I would consider like a authentic, like a genuine system of Tai Chi. And then yeah, like
right.
a significant period of time before that. From about the age of 18, I was training fairly seriously. Like I took it seriously and did it a lot until the time that I would have met Sifu and his seniors when I was something like 26 or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, so I
And
wouldn't say it wouldn't be a cumulative of decades of those other martial arts, but the
yeah,
whole
cool,
journey
cool,
has
cool.
certainly been decades, yes.
Yeah, cool. And you had that introduction through what we would call external arts initially for a while.
Yeah, I mean, as a child, I guess I did like Taekwondo was, yeah, I guess you would call
Right.
it an external art. It's very athletic. It's good for kids and young
For
people. I'm not
kids. Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about adults either, but like that
yeah.
athleticism, I think is like Tai Chi is not for kids. Kids should be wrestling and moving, and so this kind of thing was a good foundation.
Yeah.
Uh, and then yeah, a lot of years with I guess I had one other long-term teacher, um, my good friend Tao, and I actually started a system of Tai Chi with him and what I've referred to there as natural fist boxing or Ziran Men, Kung Fu.
Ah,
And
okay.
he was an all-round martial artist. He was, he came from a background of Sundar and Muay Thai and
Right.
as well as the kind of internal arts as well. So I just trained whatever he was teaching, which at that time was Tai Chi, Bagua, Kung Fu, and then Muay Thai. So I ended up in the
Right.
fight gyms and around that scene, basically under his influence. Yeah, which was great. It was an incredible foundation. He's an incredible, still training Muay Thai and fantastic. Yeah, teaching Muay Thai, coaching Muay Thai, and
Right.
so
And you grew up in partly in Sydney and largely in Melbourne is most of this that you're talking about now?
yeah, that would be largely Melbourne. Yeah, I grew up my teenage years in Sydney, but I wasn't doing anything as
Right.
constructive as training martial arts and cultivation in my teenage years until the very end. But I got introduced into actually like Tai Chi first. It was my reintroduction out of adolescence and into training was actually through a Tai Chi system, through a
Right.
fantastic guy in Sydney. And that kind of sparked my interest for, started looking at the classics, the Tai Chi classics and stuff. And this idea of what Tai Chi was sounded incredible and something that I wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, but that led me to, when I moved down to Melbourne and got away from Sydney, which was probably a good idea at the time. I met Dow and jumped deep into training with him full time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So we know each other already, just for any new people listening. I've trained with you a handful of times, which has been amazing. We've done some training in Singapore and Thailand. I came to Melbourne to visit you, so you're not a complete stranger to me.
I hope it's fairly obvious.
Yeah. So, and obviously, I'm also teaching the HME system in Perth, in Western Australia.
Bias.
Um,
Corrupted
what's
already.
that?
Corrupted already.
Yeah, exactly. um, so I've noticed that a lot of the seniors in this school do come from a background of other martial arts. Um, and then once they met Sifu, kind of switched over. Maybe a good thing to point out would be the difference between internal and external. Your thoughts would be interesting on this. I would probably say a simplest explanation would be external generates power from contraction, internal generates power from releasing muscles and using the tissue. Um, so yeah, is that fair to say that most of the senior guys in the school had previous martial art experience?
I think most of them had previous
Mm,
martial art experiences, which I think can be, I mean, obviously, if most of the seniors did have previous experience, and they're kind of senior in the system, it speaks to that there can be a great benefit to that.
yeah, agreed.
If you can empty your cup when you come into
Mm,
something, which is the case for anything.
mm,
If you can empty your cup, then obviously you can allow more transformation, more change, let
yeah.
go of preconceived ideas about how things operate, which is usually a bit of a process if you come from a different background. I certainly, when I first started training under the HME system, I'd been doing Tai Chi for quite a while. Um, and I thought that I knew something, but I was pretty quickly humbled, to be honest. It didn't take much. Yeah, my first experience of it was like, oh, okay. It was a little bit like, wow, these guys are doing everything that it says in the classics that were like the
Right.
mysterious ideas, but so all of a sudden there was like, oh, there's this practical pathway that
Mm,
is actually embodying these principles, if you like, which can seem ambiguous and high-minded and mysterious. But the further you
absolutely.
go into it, if you have the right instructions, the more you realize that it's quite actual. And the classics don't really hide anything. I mean, they're in certain kind of language, which is language of the day and language of the culture. I don't know if it's particularly trying to hide anything. It feels like when you
Mm,
have the instruction, it makes a lot of sense. I think that the classics operate much more like a checklist than a how-to. Yep, the
right.
how-to really does need to come from someone who can do. In my experience, it's often counterintuitive to what we think that it is. The amount of times I've heard Sifu say, "You're 100% wrong," as in exactly the opposite of what you thought it was. So yeah, these things you can't just rely on your
Mm,
intuition and what you assume to be correct. It's often, this as a path, it's referred to as a path of reversal. So there you go. It's
yeah.
quite, even that speaks to that it is often not what we think that it is.
Yeah.
So anyhow, to answer your question about people coming from a background of external martial arts, yes, it's true. And that can be a great advantage, I think, especially when it comes to like application and just being able to move naturally around. If you've
Mm,
had a history of doing that, there's those certain things, if you've cultivated them through training Kung Fu, through repetition over time to build a skill, then they become embodied. So you don't have to reteach someone who has trained pinch stepping up and down
yeah.
a hall 100,000 times. You don't have to reteach them that external mechanic. It's already built in. So
Mm,
this idea of external and internal, I certainly don't believe in the idea of one being right or wrong or one being better or worse. I think it's ridiculous. There are many paths and there are many goals. But there's a good example is that there is an external mechanic of how you physically move your body on the outside. How does your structure move across the room? So that the external exercise will look the same, whether it was internal or external. You're training the external body. However, the process of, the idea of internal talks to going inside. So if we're talking about internal and external martial arts, and I just keep it really simple, and we talk about this on the level of physicality, inside, the further inside you, like internal means you go inside and you go into deeper layers. So in the beginning, externally, I go, oh, shoulder tension stops me from being able to generate power, even if I'm throwing, mass times acceleration from my waist, which is external, an external mechanic idea, right? But I first have to go, well, I have to be able to instruct the external body to be able to drop the shoulder. That's one level. That's an external level of correcting your structure. The more internal it becomes, the more refined it becomes, the deeper it goes. So yes, I can drop my shoulder and I can then learn to relax the shoulder. So now I relax my muscles and I have more access to the joints and the joint starts to open. That's another level of internal. It's a deeper layer from the external to the internal, from the coarse to the refined. You start accessing beyond the joints and the relaxation of the muscles, and you start to access tendons and white tissue and so on. I don't know how deep it goes. The I Ching process is like, this tendon changing, washing the marrow of the bones, that speaks to the deepest part of the physicality of your body. Now, if it's training the physical body in this way, when we start to talk about internal arts more broadly than just, say, the physicality of martial arts, again, it's talking to this process of working from the coarse to the refined, from outside to inside. So this process of accessing, and even just, let's think about it simply, learning to relax your muscles, which is, if you like, kind of level one of internal. That very process in itself transposes over the rest of this being, which is, if you like, this body and this mind. So you can't really train this body to be relaxed at any deep level without, at least at the time that you're doing it, the mind being in some kind of relative calm. So the processes that we go through, and this is what I love about Tai Chi in many ways, is that it's through the body, it's so physical, it's so tangible. So the deeper that I go in, the more that the mind has to be able to saturate in order for me to do that. The mind comes into calm. The process of release of the muscles transposes over the mind. So the mind becomes released. We say there's always these yin-yang differentials, structure and release. So I learn to have a correct structure and be upright in my physical body. And I learn to release, let's just say, even the muscles. That's one differential of up and down, if you like, of yin and yang, structure and release. If I think about that as a description of the level of mind and consciousness, that sounds pretty good to me, even at the most fundamental level, to have a mind which is well structured, but also completely released. Like that therein lies the fruit in the path. Like if you follow that all the way, that's already gold for me. That's like, for me, that's like gold. Like where else is it going?
So is this part of what you'd refer to as cultivation? Because Tai Chi is commonly known of being used for health. Some people are interested in the martial art, but then there's this cultivation aspect that, from my observation, seems to be largely unknown or misunderstood. So what is the cultivation aspect, and can anyone do it, and how can it help them?
So what is cultivation?
Because it seems that's the real fruit of the Tai Chi path, whereas a lot of us have our focus on other aspects. So yeah, what is that part of it?
Well, I guess you could say it is the fruit of the path, or it is the path. Cultivation is the path. So cultivation is development and refinement towards a particular skill or a quality, right? So like you can cultivate your personality to be less of a jerk and more kind-hearted. That's the cultivation. So it requires focus. It requires, so non-distraction. It requires repetition. It requires depth. All of these fundamental qualities of cultivation that are required, like creating the right conditions, if you like, in some ways they go against the stream of certainly modern life. Like focus, like we're distracted by, we have the shortest concentration span. How long is a pop song now compared to when we were young?
Yeah.
Like half the time. And no one even listens to the whole song, right? So there's constant distraction. We have a short attention span. There's, repetition, like we're changing all the time. We don't it's a rare person, I think, and that's why it's interesting. Like Taiji is quite niche, is everyone I know who really goes deep into it, they can thrive on repetition. Because every repetition is born fresh, really. There is no real repetition every time. Like you can never do even one movement of the form the same twice. You can't. That's the nature of things, is that it's different every time. But when we're constantly kind of fed an endless scrolling stream of changing things, we don't see the more subtle differences between one repetition to the next. It just seems boring. So certainly, can anyone do it? Yes, but it does, in a manner of speaking, go against those habits that we have cultivated, if you like. Because cultivation is, towards a skill, refined over time, then, you cultivate things even if you do so mindlessly. It's just that you cultivate mindless habits.
Yeah.
But it's a habit nonetheless, right? But you're not making, there's no autonomy in that. It can't lead to liberation because you're not taking charge of its direction whatsoever. It's just you're following distraction. So yes, anyone can do it, but reality is, the deeper that you want to go, the more that the peripheral things need to be let go of. So being able to focus in on one singular thing, and cultivation, I think, speaks to singularity. Being able to bring things down into singularity requires letting go of all the other bits. So it's natural that if you find fruit along the path, and it is like that, it's not like you don't get any benefit. You only get a benefit when you're an absolute Tai Chi meditation master. Well, none of us would even go on the next day because we're so far from that. So, but you do see the fruits. And I'm speaking to you, you have your own experience of this. And anyone who's spent quality time repeating something like this, they themselves have kept doing that because they get some benefit from it. So certainly a little bit more released, a little bit more calm, cool and collected is better than one increment in the other direction. So the fruit is fairly immediate. And then if it's enough, you keep going, you see the value, you get your first crop. Well, it's worth planting the crops again for next year. This idea of cultivation, it's often associated with the cultivation of ground, of soil, of land, right? So the ground of our ground is this mind and this body. So you have to think about, what do you feed it? How do you cultivate your soil? If you put impure things into the soil, well, then it affects the fruits of the soil. The more that you can understand and cultivate healthy soil, healthy ground, it matters to you what you put in, and it makes sense. It becomes a natural thing, if you like, to put the right things into the soil and to avoid putting the wrong things into the soil, because you see the benefit, you see the crop, you see the fruit. You've reaped what you sow. So when you start to see that simple cause and effect, it's not like, it's such a difficult thing to not go out and get smashed on Friday night. It's like, it's obvious. Well, I mean, the older you get, the more normal, it should become normalized to give away those things anyway, I believe. Because, you don't want to, like, I'm a father. It's like, I don't want to be like hungover on Saturday morning and not be able to function and hang out with my kid. I don't want to be hungover on a Saturday morning because I want to get up and I want to do my seated practice and do some Tai Chi. Like, it's fairly simple in that respect.
Yeah, cool. So it sounds like there's an element of developing character involved with that. And then, yeah, something interesting you said uh, in regards to everyone who's working on it is striving, training, doing their best, and then, yeah, you may be many miles off someone with greater skill or something like that. But I've sort of noticed in teaching, it's good to not compare yourself. Like, for example, we compare ourselves to Sifu, and his skill is so far that, it can be depressing if you focus on that. But then there's something I see in people, someone that just comes along to class for a little while and they get something. And so if we take all the comparisons away, there's an improvement in their life in whatever way that is for them, even if they're not going hardcore. Or there's yeah, I've noticed that there's many different approaches, many different intensities of how to come at it,
Sure.
but everyone seems to get their own thing from it. And I guess yeah, everyone's different in that sense, hey?
Yeah, I mean, it's as Sifu Adam often has said, it's very much goal dependent. It's
Right.
very, it's very goal dependent. Like, and I think it is valuable to have goals. So to know why you're doing what you're doing is that has a value unto itself, and it's going to lead you towards. It's like the analogy of crops again. It's like if I want to eat tomatoes, I'm going to plant tomato seeds. So
Yeah.
it makes sense to know what you want and what your goal is, or what your goals are. And certainly, I think probably, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this is true for Heaven Man Earth in particular, because it's quite niche and there's a lot of people training pretty seriously. But certainly, if I look more broadly, I would say that the majority of people aren't looking to be a Tai Chi master. That's not really is that really the goal? And what does it mean? And does it matter if you achieve that or not? Like, maybe that if that was a goal, it gives you an intensity of practice, which drives you. So that's a beautiful thing unto itself. But, like a lot of people, if I think we all can associate, we can connect with the idea of wanting to be healthier and happier, and there's one thing I can safely say about Tai Chi, because I guess there's a lot of things that spark a little bit of controversy in the little hole that is the Tai Chi world, which really doesn't actually matter. Insignificant. But, I can certainly say that when I've seen people practice this system, it does, I've seen it time and time again. People get healthier, happier, like a more robust physical health, a calmer
Yeah.
mind. Like I've seen it just time and time again, and even if your goal is more grandiose than that, if you like, well, that the healthier and happier should be that should be one of the fruits. That should be an effect of the cause of the practice.
Right.
So, this idea of comparing, well, I mean, it's very hard to compare because of those different goals, and every individual has their own goal, right? Now, comparison, yeah, sure, it can be depressing. It can be inspiring too,
Yeah,
right? It's
totally.
it's kind of like how people talk about being non-judgmental. I get it. I get that. Like, you don't have to discriminate and be a jerk, but we make judgments all the time. And to not have judgment would be like the death of you. It's pretty fundamental. We make judgments on the most fundamental levels all the time for our own physical safety.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be a smart ass, but we also make judgments about where are we going to spend our time. So if my goal is to be a Tai Chi master, I better do a lot of Tai Chi. If my
Yeah.
goal is to be the ultimate fighter, I better fight a lot. If my goal is to be healthier, I better look at my diet. I better look at my exercise. How much sunshine am I getting? Like those fundamental things. If I want to have a healthy relationship with my spouse, I better look at the language that I use, the attitudes that I take. Yes, cultivation of personality you mentioned before. I think this is a vital ingredient on an internal, on any path really, but on the path of going inside. Generally, if you look honestly inside, everything is not perfect. If you look inside and you don't see anything, any kind of personality work to be done, any cultivation towards your behavior or thoughts or, you know, what you proliferate in this life, in this being, then you're probably not looking honestly. So, and I think actually that working on the personality, uh, from my experience, from my direct experience, and from what I've seen is if you actually do start to cultivate and access chi and the power that comes with that, then it's a pretty good idea that you cultivate the personality at the same time. Otherwise, you supercharge the non-cultivated personality, and that can be very damaging to yourself and to others. So, you know, and I've never been, I don't, okay, so somehow I think I fell into an error a couple of years ago where I actually thought, I don't know how I thought this because no one who ever taught me ever suggested this to me. So I just was my own little creation. That I actually thought that Tai Chi in and of itself was enough. In the sense that just doing Tai Chi would tidy up the personality, and because it's all based on release, and there's some truth in this, is that because you're always learning to let go of physical contraction, physical tension, that which binds the body, that which binds the heart, that which binds the mind, or the mind that binds this body and this heart, and you're learning to release that, well, then you should just become cooler. You should become a better person. But I can say very clearly from my experience, my own experience, that that is definitely not the case. And that as you access more and you access more chi, more power, then it's very important to tidy up the personality continuously, to have a reflective practice, to keep looking inside and to keep practicing to be more skillful in the way that we deal with ourselves, our own mind, our own body, and the people around us. Yeah, very
So
important.
this is all the training that happens when you're not training.
Yeah, I mean it happens all the time.
Like when you're not physically
No,
doing the
well, I mean, I think
practice.
it happens when you're training and when you're not training. You're right. It's what you take off the mat, so to speak. But I mean, Tai Chi certainly can be a beautiful vehicle for looking at these things and tidying up these things, no doubt. But if you don't direct it in that way, and you don't strengthen the muscle that requires you to look at it in that way, which means doing it on and off the mat, doing it all the time, then it's very easy to slip into something else. Absolutely, Tai Chi can be an incredible, I mean, I've, you know, some people might have heard me say this before, but I think it's like the most humbling thing I've ever done in my life, because every day of my life I'm doing something I can't do.
Yeah.
I can't do Tai Chi. And if I look honestly, I see I can't do it. And then we say 4 hands, 4 feet, right? So we require our brothers and sisters, we require our training partners, our teachers, our students. And then when we get that direct feedback, you know, like, oh, like you're training to be able to do a particular skill, and then you go with your Kung Fu brother and you can't do it.
Yeah.
And they can, and you can't. And then, oh, like all of a sudden you can, how do I deal with this ego that arises out of that? And if I'm dealing with it, well, then I have to be really honest and go, well, I still have it. If I'm battling the ego, well, then I have to be immediately humble because I still have it. You know, and no one can see that from the outside. So it requires this deep authenticity to be able to look at yourself. Like maybe, like you're looking deeply and you're doing a neutralizing exercise where the other person, if you've got the skill, they can't move you. And maybe externally you can do, there's even little parlor tricks you can do and you can't get moved. But only you know inside
Yeah.
where it caught you, where
So
it caught
true.
you in the tissues, where you contracted, even if it only just contracted in your mind. If you look honestly, the will, you wanted to win, you didn't want to lose. You still
Yeah.
haven't. Don't keep that. Like the game's not over. There's still so much path to walk. So you
Yeah.
have to continue to do that. And if you do it honestly, it's incredibly humbling. But if you do it honestly, then it and correctly, then it should tidy up the personality and put you in, keep putting us in the right direction. Yeah.
Right. And this sounds like it's something that's also intrinsic to that thing Tai Chi is supposed to be famous for transforming your nervous system, i.e., overcoming fight or flight.
Yeah, sure.
So that
So
would be the physical counterpart to what you're talking about, cleaning
yeah,
up the
sure.
personality.
Sure. So yeah, we can certainly, well, I mean, if you can be moved, then you can be moved because there's fight and flight,
Right.
because it still exists. But yes, like, so, I mean, I think maybe there's a point that you can reach where the job is done in that respect. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't reached it because what I can see is that it requires continued practice. Yeah. So I can reflect on times, and I've spoken about this publicly before anyway, but there was a time in when I was training in Chiang Mai in Thailand, and it was quite, well into a training trip, into an intensive with Sifu Adam. So training a lot of hours every day, and I had a bike accident. And I mean, I was probably going a little bit too fast, but it was like, it was circumstance as well. There was gravel out on the road and stuff. But I came off the bike, and I won't go into the details of the story, but basically I was able to come out without a scratch, the bike without a scratch, stand the bike back up on itself and kind of ride away. But the remarkable thing to me at that time was that I can honestly say there was no arising of the fight flight. Zero.
Right.
Zero. And zero afterwards as well, which to me was quite a telling thing. Like I'd been in a car accident before, in a serious car accident, and when I was much younger, and I can tell you that my whole being and body was in a bit of trouble for at least a few days. Like I
Right.
remember, like the whole nervous system was like locked up.
Yeah, the
I
shock
was kind of
response.
okay afterwards, and then the next day I was like all my muscles
Right.
in shock and stuff. Like nothing terrible, but I was like
Yeah.
I kind of wasn't okay, and it was very obvious. And then to kind of compare that to this, it's like they're chalk and cheese. I went straight to lunch. Like I just like got on the bike and went and met everyone and sat down and had lunch and was like, oh, like nothing had happened. Now, I'd love to say that that's a completely permanent state, but I can see that it's still somewhat dependent on the depth of, how deep is the mind from one day to the next? What is the
Right.
fluctuations of life? Like it still fluctuates some. I don't know.
Mm.
I'm not gonna plan on getting on any more car or bike
Testing it.
to find out. But yeah, I think that it requires, I mean, I can just see in my Tai Chi, which is not perfect. Like that's enough. I can see that the nervous system is, it still
Yeah.
behaves. But it's certainly a big game changer. And one of the reasons that it does that is that on the fundamental level, if you like I was talking about kind of layers of from outside to inside, from external to internal, from coarse to refined, one of the
Mm.
entry levels of internal is to learn to relax your muscles and the fight, flight, and learn to relax your muscles, but also beyond that, like continually looking at It's like this idea of song or to feng song, to release that we talk about is a continuity of release. It's a continuity of non-contraction. So you don't just relax your muscles and then it's a passive thing. You're continually looking at the point of arising, if you like. So you're like, it's constantly not turning on. And you do this with the muscles. Now, the more you do that, the more you become fluid and articulate at that. So you don't like, I don't really need to look and go, oh, I have to turn off that muscle, which I did there were certain muscles that I had to, in my training, I literally just had to, for months at a time, try to switch off that muscle. Like I remember the first time doing standing practice and my teacher saying, you have to relax your ass muscles. And I was like, what? Like that's impossible.
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
impossible. It's like, I don't even
That
know.
is
How do you access,
impossible for a lot
how
of
do you stand up and make your
students.
ass muscles relax? I don't know. And it took me ages. And now it's like, and it's like I have to like think about it to switch them on.
Yeah,
So for better or
yeah. I mean, part of how all those parts of the body are so bound up to the bit next to them, right? So that
worse.
you,
Yeah,
you try to turn one off, and it's just so interrelated with the things next to it that it just doesn't listen.
absolutely. One part moves, all parts moves the wrong way. Contraction.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
So, it becomes, you become fluid at this. It becomes
Mm.
your cultivated habit to continually release tension from the muscles. Now, the fight flight response is totally related to the nervous system, but also the switching on and off of muscles. When we go into fight or flight, go like everything contracts and you're ready to run or you're ready to fight. Yeah. So when you train continuously to let go of this response, then it rewires the system. It really, really does. Now, you might not be a perfect, you might still, it doesn't mean you do Tai Chi for a year and then, your moods will never fluctuate and you'll never get a
Mm.
fright or anything like this. But you can see, within a relatively, I would say, relative to a lifetime and a path of practice, a relatively short period of time, oh, I'm actually like, I'm less reactive. I
Yeah.
don't just fly off the handle anymore. Maybe my road rage reduced. I don't know. Like people get pretty worked up out there. That becomes largely a foreign concept when you habitualize and cultivate this habit of release. That starts to become like what's the word I'm looking for? It's a concept, and then it's a bit of a like it's a foreign experience, actually, because you cultivate
Yeah.
something in a very different direction.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It seems like a part of what we were talking about earlier of how everyone has a different intention, different goals, gets it at a different level, but that transformation of the nervous system to whatever degree, whether they've been doing it 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, that's I think something personal that people gain for themselves in their own stage, in their own way,
For
depending on their
sure.
own training. That's quite valuable, quite individual, but valuable to each person.
Extremely valuable. Maybe the most valuable thing about it, really.
Mm.
Like keep coming back to things that Sifu says, but I don't want to say them
Yeah,
like they're like they're mine. But
yeah,
Sifu talks about striving for normalcy.
yeah,
Like just to be, let's say, cool head, warm feet.
right.
Just be cool, calm, and collected, and to be able to be present for the people in our lives. Like that requires being able to, you know, uh, let go of external distraction, including thoughts. Like when are we not present with the people around us? That's when we're distracted by our own thoughts, etc., our own concerns, our own worries, what's going on in the external environment can pull us out. Like the more you come in and you learn to let go of distraction, the more that you can be present with the people around you. I can personally say that I can remember being an incredibly distracted teenager. for various reasons, internal and external. I cultivated that. Extremely distracted by my own little internal world. That's not what internal, when we talk about internal cultivation, that is not it. That's not thought. Distracted by your own thoughts does not count as inside. That's still outside. And I can definitely say that I have the capacity to be very, very present now. And this is an incredibly valuable thing in your relationships and in your life. And, you know, like how many will become a Tai Chi master? You know, like, I'm going to be a Tai Chi master. I'm going to like do this or that, or I'm going to be the greatest Tai Chi fighter. Like, you know, like strive for normalcy.
Yeah.
Have good relationships with your loved ones, you know, like function normally. You know, it's true that oftentimes spiritual people are the worst, the most anxious,
Totally.
distracted, the most depressed. And, you know, there's a reason for that, because when we experience those things, if we have any kind of inclination towards reflection, we will probably start to try to look inside. So, you know, it makes sense that people that are spiritually inclined are also inclined towards those things which they battle on their spiritual path. But the guy that just kind of goes to work, raises his family, you know, does whatever, a simple laboring job or something, which I am not condescending to in any way whatsoever, is probably more functional and cool, calm, and collected than the average spiritual guy, potentially.
I hate to agree, but I agree.
The average Aussie is pretty chilled out, man.
Right. Or maybe that's what it is. Yeah. Yeah, cool. I wanted to ask you something a bit off the subject. From speaking to you before, you told me you did a lot of work with street kids and counselling and helping youth that were, you know, less fortunate than others. So, were there ways that you developed over doing that job over years that you managed to connect with those people and the youths, and did you find ways to, like, you know, a skill over time that you found to be able to kind of raise them up or connect with them or let them sort of feel some love in their day? And if so, how has that contributed to your path, and how does that help you now with, you know, teaching Tai Chi and running workshops and things?
I guess there's two parts to the question.
Yeah.
One is, how did that experience influence the way that I teach and practice? And then the first part of the question is more about, was I able to apply, or what did I apply in terms of being able to work with people in those settings?
Yeah, did you find something developed over time where you were able to connect more with them or able to help them better just through your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to what I was just talking about in terms of being present, because,
Yeah, right.
you know, that's a very, okay, so in fact, all of the time that I was turning off the air conditioning here, all of the time that I was working in that field, which was drug and alcohol specific,
Right.
the whole time that I was working in that field, I was also training quite a lot. And including doing, you know, a couple of systems of Tai Chi, including having started the HME stuff. And I think one of the errors I don't know if it's an error, but in early days, I guess I actually literally tried to take the skills of what I was learning and try to teach it to people in those settings. Now, for a few, that was appropriate. Yep. But when you're, say, sleeping on the street, have a drug addiction, you're under the threat of violence from others or the risk of going to prison and facing violence there. You know, when your world is unsafe and unsure, that is not the time that you can go in and cultivate and do internal practice. That's the time when you need external safety to start with, right?
Yeah, the
From
simple
the
things,
outside in, from the coarse to the refined,
the
from
basics.
external to internal, you need the basics. So then what the skill that really can be applied then is that you let go of distraction and what you think someone needs and what you think would be good for them, and you become present to them in their situation as it is. And you, if someone's in an extreme, you work with them to find those basic mechanisms of safety and calm and the external level.
Mm.
You set those conditions before someone can start to look inside. Young people need to build a healthy ego before you destroy it, before you pull down the ego into pieces. And, you know, this idea of like diminishing the ego, destroying the ego. Well, first you need a healthy one. Before you go inside and start looking at inner cultivation, well, you need an external surrounding. You need a safe place to do that. Otherwise, the fight-flight response is never going to turn off. If you're not safe, there's no way. Like I know people to this very day, you know, because I often train outside. I often train in parks and all sorts of. I've trained in the most
Same.
hilarious sorts of situations, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're, and you know, I still notice, like, you know, if someone is still not really settled in themselves, they're unsure of the external environment, they get pulled out by that. You know, if you know, I would. So even this is kind of functional, normal people, and they still get pulled out by the external distractions because somewhere the fight-flight response is not going. It's called to settle down here. So yeah, a major skill is being present, so that you can be present to what any situation is needed, and then you can cultivate the conditions by which someone can start to have a basic level of safety and assurance, and then over time maybe you can start a process which is, you know, gradually working in.
Right.
I guess, you know, the other skill that I was able to apply is that, and not just because of my training, also because of my life, but I was able to go into, I guess, certain situations and settings which for a lot of people probably would have felt very unsafe and unsure. And because of an internal assurance within myself and a safety within myself and a calm within myself, I could go into those situations and be okay. And also, you know, when you, rather than, you know, so I said that kind of in a way, the mistake of me trying to teach exactly what I was learning to people, it's much, much better that you just, you know, if I cultivate myself to be calm, cool, and collected, then I go into those situations, then I can have, by my being, an influence on those around me.
Nice.
You know, the words are very cheap for someone who is who can't hear them. You know, they don't mean a thing. But your presence, your calm presence, your internal capacity to feel safe and cool with yourself gives them within your proximity, you give them that some degree more than less of that safety and that cool, calm collectedness for themselves. And that gives them maybe a stepping stone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. I've observed that presence that you have. It's quite inspiring, I must say. Um, I've seen it in the private group training we've done, and also seen you when you teach workshops, like how you seem to have this ability to teach everyone directly, even though they're all at these completely different levels, complete beginners, people more experienced, yet you still seem to manage to have that ability to teach them all where they're at. And so everyone walks away feeling like they've got just what they needed, but they're at completely different levels. So um, I've always found that quite interesting how you have that ability to do that.
I guess it's not me. In fact, the less me that it is, the more that it is simply the nature of the art of which I'm trying to teach and put across.
Yeah.
So that is the nature of it, is that you can have a beginner and someone very experienced doing externally exactly the same thing, but their capacity to access deeper levels inside, more refined levels of articulation, allows them to be able to understand the given method on a deeper or more superficial level according to their experience. So, I mean, you've trained enough. It's the instruction that you heard 1,000 times from day one that gives you a moment of great clarity and realization. Oh my God, he
Yeah.
said suspended from above. And my whole understanding of the art just changed. It's like, well, your teacher said that on day one. And he said every lesson that you did, every kind of, any degree of kind of understanding, like sudden understanding or like progression that I've made, has always been like the same golden jewel that the teacher gave you on day one. So it's inherent to the art. It's not really,
Yeah.
yeah. The more we can get out of it. I mean, Tai Chi is much greater than you or I.
Mm.
Much, much greater than you or I. Like, it's way beyond. It's an expression of the great way, of the absolute, of something that can't even be expressed. So the more we can get out of the way of that and just taught as we've been taught, as we've seen the fruits, that's so therefore why change it? Like, teachers, you've been taught essentially. And the only thing I try to do is, when I realize that I've been doing something wrong for a long time, if I can help my students avoid making the same error and going straight to a more correct version and understanding of a thing, then I will try to skip that for them. But everyone has their path, and they'll all have to do the time, and they'll all have their understanding. And you tell them exactly how it is and they don't get it, and then you tell them exactly how it is and they don't get it, and then you tell them exactly how it is and bang, they get it. And that's
Yeah. Yeah.
the nature of it. That's why it's all repetition. It's all repetition, like, if without the repetition,
Mm.
and this talks to this idea of cultivation. And I said before, cultivation is singularity. There's an aspect of cultivation which is about singularity. If we are constantly changing, which is kind of the nature of the modern approach, and that's nothing wrong. Some people like to grab from here and there because they have certain goals. Like a mixed martial artist grabs from here, there, and everywhere because they're bringing it all together and they have that goal to be the ultimate fighter or whatever like that. Then fine, for that goal, that's perfect. Yeah. But if you want to go deep, and we're talking about the internal being in, like the nature of is going in, down, going deeper, from external to internal, from coarse to refine, that's a process of going also deeper. Then the fastest way to go deep is through singularity. It's very obvious that I remember very young, my first teacher talking about, not digging too many holes, just dig one hole. And that idea always rang very true to me. I'm
So
not
what
a
does that mean? Does that mean one direction or focusing on one thing
well,
at a time?
yeah, one thing at a time. And look, I mean, this is, to me, it's the beauty of a system. Now, a
Yeah.
system
Right.
a system can have more than one, you don't just do literally like I only stand. Although maybe that could work. I don't know. That could work depending on your goal. But I'm really talking about uh, singularity in this context in terms of like a system, right?
Right.
So I've, you know, and I'm not saying that that is for everyone. Because like I said before, depending on goals, and some people love to pull from here and pull from there and do it. And I'm not talking down on that in any way. But
Kung fu salad.
sure. But my inclination from a very young age was that that analogy of digging one hole, and my teacher used to talk about, like you can't have a foot on both horses. When one horse bolts
Right.
and that horse finally bolts, you can't have your foot on both horses or you fall off and you have none. This
Unless you're Van Damme.
these was that Van Damme or
Unless you're Van Damme.
Van Damme because he can do this.
Yeah.
Like was Van Damme did my teacher quote Van Damme? God damn, I have to reassess everything in my life.
Yeah.
Although I thought JCVD was an awesome movie. But anyway,
Yeah.
this idea always spoke to me of kind of trying to, because I think my mind was very scattered, as many of us are that way inclined. And I think I was quite scattered in many directions. And so I was kind of it was like someone was speaking a truth to me when they talked to me about bringing it in to a singularity. So for me, that rung really true. And so for me, it was this, there was a real sense of arriving, of kind of being able to put a lot of things down when I found this system of Tai Chi. I was kind of like, it took me a while to kind of accept that, but I went, oh, like what I want, and it's still true today, and it might change in the future. I don't know. We don't know how these things evolve over time, but so far and right now, it's like there's everything that I seek and find valuable is within a system, and I feel very blessed in that way. And I understand plenty of people would say, well, then you're kind of blinding yourself to all these other potentials. And sure, every once in a while, it's great to get out and move in a different way. And you realize, oh, I'm really coordinated in this way, but I'm pretty bad that way. And like that can be great in terms of, like cultivation as a human being for sure. But for me, there's a peace in finding a system and being able to go in depth within that system. And I've found greater fruits doing it this way than any other way that I have in my life.
Well, especially if that's a full and comprehensive system, obviously.
Yes, for sure.
Which many of them seem to be missing pieces these days. Why do you think that is?
Because they're trying to put too many pieces together.
Right.
I don't know though, because I don't have, like I have
Right.
limited experience. I can't really speak about how other systems are really doing anything, to be honest. Like I think there is always the counterfeit and the authentic.
Mm.
And I think that the authentic has always been rare. And I think that it's the nature of it to be rare because let's face the authentic if you practice authentically, it's pretty challenging.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
pretty
not for everyone.
it's not for everyone, and that's not
Yeah.
to be condescending, it's just not for everyone. I mean, and to say that Tai Chi is the only path would be ridiculous. What a
Mm.
ridiculous thing to say, in my opinion. That would be a silly thing to say. It's not for everyone, which doesn't mean it's like exclusive and you can only do it if you're this certain. It's like blah, blah, blah. No, it's just suitable for some. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's quite a common story what you just told of once you found this system, Sifu Adams' complete system, once you found it, you felt that sense of home. And, because for me personally, I had done 3 other styles of Tai Chi, and I get it from a lot of students that show up, and a lot of them have done a lot of stuff, and then they find this, and it seems to have all of the aspects that, certainly for me, that I was looking for 15 years previously.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've noticed it's quite a common thing that when people find this complete system, they're kind of happy and home, and it has the elements that the previous styles might have only had parts of, which were good parts, but without all of it, it doesn't quite seem to get you there with that whole
Sure.
approach.
Yeah, like I've seen many people have that experience too. I mean, the
Mm,
ones that stick around have that experience. That's why they stick around. Yeah.
yeah.
But it's true that I have encountered many with much experience who have found this system and gone, yeah, this is for me. And this kind of this fulfills a lot of the things that they're looking for. Missing pieces and stuff like that. Like it is something that you hear, and I think it's one of the reasons why uh, the system and the school has grown a lot in certainly the last, whatever it is, 15, 18 years or whatever it is that I've been around it. I've seen it grow, and it's yeah, I guess there's something a little bit gratifying about that for me. The first time that I met Sifu Adam, was I'd been looking a lot and then I'd given up looking completely. So I wasn't really looking when I found him, to be honest. But I was more into martial arts then as well, like way more than I'm inclined to care about it now. And at that time, he certainly was the most, like I hadn't felt anything like that. And I've been around some pretty good guys like pro fighters and stuff, and I'm not I'm not saying they don't have power. Believe me, they have power. They have real power. But I'd never felt something like it. Yeah. So that was a sell for me. I was like, whoa, like incredible. Like blew my mind in that way. Yeah. And then
I
didn't
remember
look back. I really didn't look back from there. It took me about a year of kind of sticking around in the boxing gym and stuff. And then I was just like, nah, it requires my time.
what
It's
was
too
your story of you saw the poster of what was it you can do
four
four
heavy
punches in 1 second or what was it?
four heavy hits in 1 second, real Taiji. Yeah.
And you went along and you got those heavy hits, right?
Well, actually, no, I didn't even need to get those heavy hits. But yeah, I mean,
Right,
I got them in a manner of speaking.
right.
I kind of I mean, these things don't need to be that crude, do they? Like,
Yeah.
if you're honest and like, I was in the presence of several practitioners who were clearly more accomplished than I was when I stepped into that space. It was like,
Mhm.
I don't need to get punched in the head to understand. It
Yeah. Yeah.
was obvious. I mean, I don't really want to point to it, but there is somewhere in the far recesses of YouTube history. Don't really encourage people to look at it. There's actually footage of, I think there's literally footage of the first time that Sifu Adam had his hands on me at a seminar
Okay.
with about 10 people in the seminar. And yeah, I'd done quite a lot of push hands. But wow, I just look like, when I look at that footage, I look like a flimsy, and I've done a lot of training, and it's just
Wow.
strange to me to look at it. Like I just look like this gangly, disconnected,
Right.
and like I'm in confusion because I'm like trying to push this guy and I'm getting thrown out, and it was all like foreign for me, all very at that time, very, even the physicality of it was like different from what I'd felt. It was very
Yeah.
foreign to the body, to the nervous system. Everything was like, what? I can't find a purchase point. The body didn't
Mm,
understand what was happening. The
yeah.
body didn't understand what was happening. And it's quite interesting. If I look at that, I see my own transformation. My first teacher told me I remember a long time ago being young and getting depressed about my progress on the path. And he just said to me, you should measure your practice in increments of 10 years.
Right.
And he was just giving me perspective at the time because I was down a rabbit hole, and I felt like I'd achieved nothing. And he was like, well, look at it. Like, where were you 10 years ago?
Mm,
And I think that can be a healthy perspective. It's like these things do take time. And when I look at, the person that I was two lots of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, then I can say, okay, not so bad. Some genuine transformation. in
Yeah.
my body and my experience of the world in this ground,
Yes.
in this ground that I've cultivated. It's bearing fruits that make me want to continue to cultivate that ground and continue to refine and improve
Mm,
those fruits. It's enough to keep going, most certainly.
nice. That's awesome.
Mm.
So I'm kind of excited to have you come to Perth for the first HME workshop, Taiji workshop from a senior. It's pretty cool.
Cool.
So you got a tour coming up. So where are you going? You're starting in Japan, right?
Mhm.
And you're going Singapore, Perth, Sydney, Byron Bay, Melbourne, Auckland, right?
Yeah, you got that. Yeah, you nailed it.
So could you maybe for someone who has never been to one of those workshops, or I know for myself personally, there's something about training with a senior in this school that seems to just make your level go like this, and then you go away and you work on it. And classes are obviously important, and your personal training is the path. But then, yeah, when you spend a week or two with Sifu or one of the seniors, it's definitely some pretty special osmosis that happens, as well as the direct exercises you learn
Mm.
and things like that. But for someone new to this kind of stuff, um, like what's the workshop? I know it's a Saturday, Sunday, 2-day workshop we're holding here. I
Mm.
think it's weekend most of the places except Japan. You've got a bit longer. What's it about? What are they going to do at the workshop? Um, yeah, why should they come along?
Mm. So the workshops, well, I'll say this, there'll be basically no Tai Chi form, as
Right.
there rarely ever is in any HME workshop, because so if someone's coming from outside the system, what's the benefit of learning the form that we do? Not much. And
Right.
for anyone who is training within the system, whether they be, you know, advanced or introductory, the focus is always going to be much more on the fundamental training, because it's the fundamental training that transforms you, so that when you do the form, it has juice, it has something real happening. So generally speaking, we always follow this process of opening the body, sinking the chi, mobilizing the chi. So the body opening process is this process of, and once again, Sifu talks about, pulling apart the Swiss watch, just for all the Swissies that have just been training with me, pulling apart the Swiss watch, pulling apart all the components. And I'm paraphrasing, sorry, Sifu, pulling apart all the components of the watch, cleaning them, putting them back together, so that we have this idea in the Tai Chi classics that one part moves, all parts move. But if all the parts aren't able to articulate, then they won't work correctly with the other. Like you were talking before, on a very fundamental level, like there's often where we can't let go of contraction somewhere in the body, there's a string of contraction, or like a chain of contraction, which is
Yeah. Okay.
related to the next and stuff like that. So
Mm.
we look at, you know, going through this process of opening the body. So this is the beginning of the internal. If you make space, the more open something is, the more space there is.
Mm.
So we're always going to start with the process of opening. Now, I want to distinguish this from warming up. It's not a warm up. It's the training has begun. And in the beginning, once again, it's like we can have people of different levels in the room. Because if we talk about levels of opening from external to internal, if you like, and I kind of pointed to this earlier, but the first place that we open the body is essentially in the joints. So we're always going to look at being able to release muscular contraction, access the joints, release the joints so that the joints can be mobilized. Once that happens, you start to be able to get more fluid, more blood, more chi, for want of a less scientific word for anyone who needed it, into the joints. Now, once that happens and that's nourished, that space allows us to go to another layer beyond that. So we can have, this is the beginning of, if you like, the I Ching Ching process. So and I'm not talking about teaching the I Ching Ching set proper, but this process begins through opening the body. So let's say that someone's never done it before, but they're interested in Tai Chi. Great. They do the opening exercises and they start to access the joints and get more mobility in their joints. Excellent. Pathway to the internal. Someone else has been training the system for 10 years. They do those opening exercises and they're getting already beyond the joints and into tendons, into white tissue, deeper, looking more deeply. How can I organize the body to be able to gain greater access? Not just releasing into the ether, releasing into the correct organization of the body, the correct conditions, the correct quality of mind. So all of these things can be spoken to. And like you said, the experience of training with someone who's done something a lot, which is the meaning of a senior, right? Someone who's, let's say, done something a lot. They're senior because they've done more hours than you have, that's all. So is that they can kind of guide you into that process. And they're standing in the room with you. So there is this idea of transmission, which is not this airy-fairy idea. It's being within proximity of someone who's changed their body in a certain way will support the neurons in your body to be able to start to change in the same way. So it doesn't matter whether someone's coming completely fresh or whether they're quite advanced. That level of opening the body will be accessible to them wherever they're at. So we always spend time, and it's great because we have 2 days, because I love to spend lots of time opening the body. Then this process always of sinking the chi. So you open the body, you make a broad, nice, wide vessel. So then when you start to release, the release goes to somewhere and it has more space to fill. The more space, the more filling, the more chi, right? So in a simple sense, now again, at a basic level, someone's never stood before and you're telling them to stand still and like they're up in their head, they're up in their heart, they're up in their shoulders. If they can learn to fundamentally let go of that, that's a beautiful entry into the beginning of the internal. If someone has been standing for a lot longer, they're starting to access deeper inside, well, then the explicit instructions can give them more understanding of what it is that they're looking at and how to go to the next layer. How do you go deeper beyond that? So this combination of opening and sinking sets the prerequisite conditions to mobilize the chi. So yes, that could be Tai Chi form, but really it's the mobilization movement. It implies movement. So we train, well, certainly in the system, we train the Song Gong exercises. So Huang's 5 Song Gong, we'll likely be looking at 1 or 2 of those, and then looking at how that mobilization and that articulation and that organization of the body relates to how we move in application. Application being perhaps form, though we won't really look at it that explicitly in the form in the workshops. But then this idea of then when I have another person standing in front of me, 4 hands, 4 feet, how does this actually apply? Because sometimes you look at Tai Chi in the form and these exercises and how does that even relate? People must wonder. What has that got to do with fighting, for example? How does that even translate to anything at all? How do I also take this idea of release and maintain it when there's activity and movement? So we build it up through this process. How do I take it off the mat? How do I maintain release when I go back into the world and I have the stresses of life? So partner work becomes a catalyst for that. You train to strengthen that capacity to maintain these qualities in these conditions in everyday life as well. So practically speaking, we'll probably take a variation of a Song Gong and look at 1 or 2 of the fundamental jins of Tai Chi, the energies of Tai Chi, and how we can organize and maintain that energy, that quality, that jin, and how can we maintain it in application? How does that apply? How does all that fundamental training then apply? Yeah.
Right. So yeah, so then we're sort of using the partner or that bit of extra pressure to test if we can maintain the conditions we've been working on our own.
For sure. Absolutely. And maintaining those, like training to maintain those conditions, but also the feedback that you get helps the body learn how to maintain those conditions, how to maintain that organization. So, you're doing it and it looks good, and then you have the extra pressure of someone in your way, and then all of a sudden you realize that that release was actually just too relaxed, not open enough, and my shoulders jamming up every time I try to push them. So how do I need to organize the body? How do I need to put things together to be able to maintain, like, say, my shape, so that their shape breaks and my shape doesn't? That's a simple example. Yeah.
Yep.
So opening, syncing, mobilization, partner work, these will all be aspects of the workshop.
Awesome. Can't wait.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, it'll be fun. You're also offering privates, I believe, while you're around all these places.
Limited.
Private lessons? Limited? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for selling my
Let the cat out the bag.
Yeah, thanks for selling my lessons, but yeah, I mean, people can inquire. It depends
cool.
It depends on where and when. Like, I have more or less to do depending on what place I'm in and stuff.
Different locations. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anything else you want to share that you think will be of some value?
I guess I don't know how much this ties into wrapping it up, but we'll see what happens. But I didn't answer one question before, in that the second half of the question you asked me about working with young people and what I had learnt, how that influences my teaching and my practice. So to speak to that, there's one thing I always remember as I was playing a lot of football, like what we call soccer in Australia, with young guys predominantly from Sudan, from South Sudan, and Somalia, but mostly South Sudan. A few different North African countries, but mostly from South Sudan. And was playing football with them, and I always remember, like, one of the guys just like putting his hand on me. I'm a small human in that context, putting his rather large hand on my shoulder and being like, "Man, what's wrong? Relax. We're having fun." And I was like, oh, like, I know I was well into Tai Chi and stuff by then, and I was like, this is hilarious. Like, what am I, like, the most fundamental idea? Like, I'm not even, like, forget about song and all these deep levels of articulation. You can't even relax on a basic level because you're trying to win. Because
yeah, totally.
And this kind of I don't think it's just Aussie, but it's a bit of an Aussie thing. It's like that self-talk when you screw up in a game of sport or whatever. You're like, come on, mate.
Yeah.
And it's like, even look at my body language when I do it. Like, I wasn't even trying to do that, but that's kind of what it makes me do when I put myself in that place. It's contractive. It's like everything narrows. It pulls in. It's that criticism, self-criticism, criticism of others. Like, that is in and of itself a contraction. And it steals away from our potential to, like I said before, be present. So how was I in that self-talk? Where was I? I was in my own head. I wasn't in the beauty of the mystery and wonder of life, kicking a ball around with all these incredible, interesting human beings, like engaged with reality in the present moment. I was vindicating myself. And we often either do that to ourselves or we do that to others. So if we can instead learn to go inside and soften and open, then we find a space in the body. So, I talked about this idea that we always look at opening the body. We say you song to open. And when you open, there is space. When there is space, there is access. There is access to the chi, even on the level of the chi of life, of this existence. The more we open, the more that we are open to the experience of what is around us. So what I would say is that come experience the practice and come with an openness. Don't come contracted and trying to find out if it's real or something. Like, if you want the most out of it, open to it. Maybe you've done it for a long time and you come and you open to it and you deepen your experience of the practice. Maybe you come, you've never done it before. And maybe in that 2 days, you can take something away of real value. Maybe you never do it again. And that's fine. In fact, to be honest, I always try to, like, I know that there are people in the room that will never come again. I mean, you're a teacher, you know what it's like. Plenty of people come and try classes, they never come again. But I genuinely, it is my genuine wish that if I'm going to spend time with someone and someone is going to spend time with me, that I impart something of value to them. If they're coming in, that's the exchange, that they're there to learn something from me, then I really genuinely want them to learn. In fact, I think this is one of the reasons that people do find value in coming to train with me for periods of time, is because I genuinely want them to improve. I want them to get it. I don't see the point in engaging in that investment of time for them or for me without getting something of it out of it. So if you come open to it, and you will gain the benefits of that. Like if you're there, you may as well be there, get the most out of it, open, learn how to sing and receive life. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, really.
Mm. No, it's beautiful. Awesome. Well, I wish you all the best for the last of your time up in the mountains in Japan there.
Oh, yeah, a few more days up
A few more
Riverside.
days.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And you've just finished with some students came to visit you for a
Yep.
week or two, or?
They were here for a while. They were here for a month, but we were up in the mountains
Oh,
together
wow.
a couple of weeks.
Okay.
And then I've been here for a couple of weeks more. So a full month up here for me. And we'll do another intensive, probably do a small circle intensive back up in the mountains. I think I'll be back in this area. It's
Right.
it's very hot in the greater Tokyo
Right.
area, in the flatlands where I live down in Noda. It's very hot in the summer. So this was my escape. And I mean, I've had the air conditioning on, but it's much, much cooler. And if you go down by the river, it's degrees cooler again. The kids have got
Right.
a fire blazing by the river as we speak. So it's
Right.
rather lovely, I must say. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my Perth students is coming to train with you in
Yes.
Japan. I think with you and Curtis.
Yes. Yeah, that's gonna be fun.
He's very excited about that.
Yeah, that will be fun. First time that me and Curtis have done an event together, so I'm
Right.
sure it will be humorous at the very least.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. No, looking
Great,
forward.
mate. Well, thanks for the chat. I'll stick some links below to what you're up to.
Cool.
And yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it, man.
you.
Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Thank
Awesome.
you.